Over the weekend, the United States carried out a dramatic operation inside Venezuela and captured President Nicolas Maduro. He's now being held in New York awaiting court proceedings. The U.S. says it was about law enforcement and narco-terrorism. Venezuela and several countries say it was an illegal abduction and an act of aggression. So what really happened, and what happens next? Here's what is being reported by major outlets.
Now the big question, why did the U.S. do it, and why now?
According to reporting, the Trump administration framed the operation as a law enforcement and national security action tied to long-standing U.S. allegations of narco-terrorism and drug charges against Maduro. Reuters also reports Trump publicly claimed the U.S. would oversee Venezuela until a safe transition, language that immediately escalated the international backlash. So officially, the pitch is, this is justice. We captured an alleged criminal leader. Now let's talk about the reasons analysts and commentators argue may be underneath the official framing. Geopolitics is rarely one-dimensional, and in a case this complex, the official charges often represent just one layer of a multifaceted strategy. Based on what's being reported and discussed in serious coverage, a number of potential unspoken drivers have been identified. It's crucial to state up front. These are not confirmed motives. They are informed hypotheses, constructed by experts observing the intersection of national interests, economic pressures, and strategic signaling. They represent the why now questions that the official narrative doesn't fully answer. We'll explore three of the most prominent theories, structuring them as distinct but potentially overlapping strategic calculations. The first, and perhaps most frequently cited driver, is energy leverage and oil strategy. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, a fact that has defined its relationship with the United States for over a century. U.S. policy has long intertwined its approach to Caracas with its broader energy and sanctions strategy. For years, Washington has used sanctions to pressure the Maduro government, specifically targeting its state-owned oil company, PDVSA. These sanctions have crippled Venezuela's production capacity, but they haven't led to the political change the U.S. sought. Recently, however, the global energy landscape has shifted dramatically. With market volatility driven by conflicts elsewhere and a tight global supply, the idea of cautiously re-engaging with Venezuelan oil has moved from the fringe to the center of policy debates. Some analysts, as noted in coverage by outlets like Reuters, interpret this high-stakes operation as part of a Venezuela gamble. The theory suggests that by demonstrating its ability to project force directly into the country, the U.S. is creating new leverage. This leverage could be used to either force political concessions in exchange for sanctions relief, allowing Venezuelan oil back onto the market under terms favorable to the U.S., or to further destabilize the regime, creating an opportunity for a more U.S.-friendly government to take control of those vast reserves. It's a high-risk, high-reward calculation tied directly to the price of a barrel of oil. The second major hypothesis centers on power projection and deterrence. An extraterritorial capture of this nature is a powerful demonstration of capability and will. It sends a clear and unambiguous message, not just to the government in Caracas, but to a global audience of both rivals and allies. To rivals like Russia and China, who have invested in and supported the Maduro government, it signals that U.S. reach is not constrained by traditional sovereign borders when its interests are at stake. It serves as a warning that their assets and allies in the Western Hemisphere are not beyond American power. To allies in the region, particularly those neighboring Venezuela, it can be seen as a reassurance that the U.S. remains the dominant security guarantor in the Americas, willing to act decisively to enforce its red lines. This isn't without precedent. Historically, the U.S. has used similar operations to assert its influence, such as the 1989 capture of Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega. In the current geopolitical climate, with great power competition intensifying, some analysts argue that this operation is a calculated move to reassert the Monroe Doctrine in the 21st century, a declaration that the U.S. will not tolerate what it perceives as hostile influence in its backyard, and is prepared to act unilaterally to prevent it. The message is less about the individual who was captured, and more about the act of capture itself. The third unspoken driver analysts point to is regional security and the immense pressure of migration. The political and economic crisis in Venezuela has precipitated one of the largest displacement crises in the world. According to the United Nations, over 7.7 million Venezuelans have left their country in recent years. This mass exodus has placed an enormous strain on neighboring countries like Colombia, Peru, and Brazil, and the effects are increasingly being felt as far north as the U.S. southern border. From a U.S. policy perspective, this isn't just a humanitarian issue. It's a significant security and stability concern. A U.S. administration, regardless of party, may calculate that the status quo in Venezuela is unsustainable, and that its spillover effects pose a direct challenge to regional stability and U.S. interests. In this context, an operation like this could be seen as a catalyst. The goal might be to deliberately destabilize the Maduro government, betting that the ensuing chaos could lead to a regime change and, eventually, a stabilization that would stem the migration flows. Alternatively, it could be a tactic to force the existing government to the negotiating table on issues beyond just politics, including border security and cooperation on migration. It's a gamble that a short-term shock, even a disruptive one, might be preferable to the long-term, grinding crisis that is exporting instability across the entire hemisphere. It is essential to circle back to our initial caveat. These three drivers, energy strategy, power projection, and migration pressure, are compelling inferences drawn by experts from geopolitical and economic incentives. They provide plausible context for why this operation might have been launched at this specific moment. However, they remain just that, inferences. They are not proven secret motives, and it's possible the reality is a combination of all three, or none at all. The only motives we can state as confirmed are those which U.S. officials have publicly claimed and are pursuing through the legal system. The line between a publicly stated reason and a deeper strategic driver is often blurry, and the full truth may not be known for years, if ever. Understanding these potential underlying factors is critical for grasping the full scope of the situation and anticipating the potential consequences, from the price of oil to the stability of an entire region. On the operational side, Reuters reported details suggesting extensive preparation, including intelligence sourcing and special forces involvement. Reuters AP and PBS described the event as a major U.S. strike raid, with a fast-moving sequence that ended in Maduro's detention. AP News CBS reporting similarly described an elite unit capture operation and the aftermath as it unfolded. CBS News. And while the U.S. emphasized success, Venezuelan authorities emphasized casualties and infrastructure impacts. International reaction has been intense, and the legality is front and center. The United Nations is scrutinizing the operation, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned it sets a dangerous precedent. Russia, China, and Maduro-aligned governments condemned it as a violation of sovereignty and international law. Even countries that are friendly with the U.S. have been cautious, often emphasizing international law rather than cheering the action. This matters because if the international norm becomes powerful countries can seize heads of state, the entire global order gets shakier. In the immediate aftermath of Maduro's capture, the reaction among Venezuelans was anything but uniform. A deep chasm of opinion, geography, and experience instantly became visible. Inside and outside the country, the news landed like a shockwave, but its tremors were felt very differently depending on where one stood. This division was amplified by a digital storm of misinformation. The information environment, already fraught with state control and propaganda, descended into chaos. As outlets like Wired and digital forensics groups have documented, social media platforms were inundated with a torrent of disinformation. Old, recycled footage from previous protests was presented as new. Audio clips were doctored. Misleading captions were attached to unrelated videos, all designed to sow confusion, incite panic, or rally support. This information fog makes it incredibly difficult for citizens and observers alike to distinguish credible updates from deliberate viral fabrication, turning every notification into a potential source of anxiety. For many in the vast Venezuelan diaspora, scattered from Miami to Madrid, the news was a moment of catharsis, a potential end to years of political and economic exile. Celebrations erupted in cities with large Venezuelan communities, fueled by the hope that Maduro's removal could finally pave the way for democratic transition and a chance to return home. But for millions still inside Venezuela, the feeling was far more precarious. While some quietly hoped for change, a more dominant emotion was fear. Fear of the unknown. Decades of political turmoil have taught them that power vacuums are rarely filled peacefully. The immediate concern for many was the risk of violent retaliation from armed civilian groups loyal to the government, known as colectivos, or from factions within the security forces. There's a palpable fear that this event could trigger not a smooth transition, but a new, more violent chapter of internal conflict, further destabilizing a nation already grappling with a profound humanitarian crisis. The question on the ground isn't just what's next, but will we be safe? Politically, the situation is just as murky. With Maduro removed, his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has stepped in, citing constitutional order. But the legitimacy of this move is fiercely debated. According to Article 233 of Venezuela's constitution, if an absolute absence of the president occurs during the first 4 years of their term, a new presidential election must be held within 30 days. However, the government's interpretation of these clauses has often been self-serving. This raises the critical question: is Rodriguez's leadership merely a constitutional formality, a brief interim phase before new elections are organized? Or is this the beginning of a strategic power consolidation by the ruling party's hardline faction, a move to secure control without its figurehead? Analysts are watching closely for key signals. Will the military leadership publicly pledge loyalty to her? Will there be a purge of officials deemed insufficiently loyal? And will the opposition and international community recognize her as a legitimate interlocutor or denounce her as a continuation of the same regime? The answers will determine whether Venezuela is on a path toward resolution or a deeper, more entrenched crisis. With Nicolás Maduro removed from the board, the complex political chessboard of Venezuela is in disarray. The nation stands at a precipice, facing several divergent and highly consequential paths forward. Each possibility carries its own set of triggers, risks, and profound implications for the Venezuelan people, the region, and the global energy market. From here, Venezuela's future has a few realistic paths. The first, and perhaps most probable in the immediate aftermath, is a scenario of regime continuity under a new face. If the security apparatus, the military high command and intelligence services, stays unified, the Chavista power structure may attempt to consolidate control. The trigger here would be a swift, coordinated decision by the ruling elite to present a united front, preventing a power vacuum. We would likely see a figure like Vice President Delcy Rodriguez or another trusted insider step into a provisional leadership role, while publicly claiming Maduro's absence is temporary and a result of foreign aggression. Short-term indicators would include televised statements from the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, pledging loyalty to the Bolivarian Constitution, alongside mass deployments of security forces to quell any potential dissent. The primary risk is that this is merely a cosmetic change, preserving the authoritarian system and failing to address the underlying economic and humanitarian crises. Economically, this path would likely see a continuation of existing policies, with little hope for the lifting of international sanctions. A second, far more dangerous path is one of escalation and instability. This could be triggered if internal factions within the ruling party or the military split. For years, analysts have pointed to rivalries between different groups, or colectivos, vying for influence and control over illicit economies. Maduro's removal could shatter the fragile equilibrium holding these factions together. If one group, perhaps a powerful military commander, rejects the chosen successor and makes a play for power, the result could be armed clashes in the streets of Caracas. Another trigger could be an interventionist response from foreign allies like Russia or Cuba, who might see their interests threatened and move to prop up a preferred faction. The indicators would be unmistakable. Conflicting statements from different military units, the emergence of barricades, and a breakdown of central command. The risks are catastrophic, potentially spiraling into a full-blown civil conflict, creating a massive humanitarian disaster and a refugee crisis that would dwarf the current exodus. This would halt any remaining oil production and send shockwaves through the region. The third scenario is a negotiated transition. This path is fraught with uncertainty, but it offers the only real hope for a peaceful democratic resolution. The trigger would require a perfect storm, a combination of sustained international pressure, a realization within the regime that their position is untenable without Maduro, and a unified, credible opposition ready to negotiate. Key figures within the military would need to see a negotiated settlement as their best guarantee for self-preservation. Short-term indicators would be back-channel talks facilitated by neutral countries like Norway or Colombia, a de-escalation of rhetoric from the government, and the release of some political prisoners as a sign of good faith. This process could lead to the formation of a transitional government and eventually free and fair elections. However, the risks are immense. Negotiations could collapse over amnesty for regime officials or the timeline for elections. Economically, a credible transition could see a phased lifting of U.S. sanctions, paving the way for crucial investment in the collapsed oil sector and a gradual recovery. But that's a long and uncertain road. Each of these futures hinges on the choices made in the coming days by generals, politicians, and diplomats, from Caracas to Washington to Moscow. One thing is clear: this capture has violently shifted Venezuela from a slow-burn chronic crisis into a high-voltage, unpredictable global flashpoint. The stability of an entire continent could hang in the balance. The legal and ethical questions surrounding this operation are just as complex as its geopolitical fallout. So, if you want, I'll make part 2. Is the capture legal under international law? And what precedent does it set for global sovereignty? Let me know what you think, and drop your take in the comments below.